Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, and welcome to another episode of Endurance Chat. I'm Michael Zalavari, and today I'm handing over the reins. Our Asian Le Mans Series review podcast is still in the works, but we didn't quite get around to finishing it this week. So Austin Zetzman and Oliver Troelvis got together to chat a little bit about the state of endurance racing at the moment and all the news that have come to light in the last few weeks. Before they crack into it though, we've got to say thanks to TheRacingLine.App, the personalised motorsport calendar. Never miss a moment of your favourite series with personalised notifications for your selection of sessions. Plan your weekends around your favourite series with the day and a week views covering all major series, all converted into your time zone. Search the Racing Line app on the iOS store or head to TheRacingLine.App for more info. Take it away, lads.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, everyone. Wherever you are in the world, welcome to another edition of Endurance Chat, this time hosted by yours truly, Austin Zetzman, aka Cookie Monster. Today, I'm joined by my favorite British person ever, zero hyperbole there, Ollie Trevisaurus. How you doing, mate?
Hello.
Oh, man, we were planning on this episode kind of being more of a recap episode of some previous events, but due to unforeseen consequences, circumstances, however you want to say it, this has almost turned into a State of Endurance episode for the end of February here. So we're going to be talking about quite a bit of different news and notes throughout the entire endurance racing kingdom, we'll say. And if we have some time, we might actually get to a recap, so we'll see where the chips lay from here. But I'm very happy to be joined by you, Ali, because we have some crazy news, I would say, out of the ACO camp, the Le Mans camp, and really we can kind of expound from there. But to start, we have some updates. Glickenhaus basically completes their shakedown for their first chassis for the LMH competitor, direct competitor for this year for the Toyota GR010, who's already has their testing campaign well underway with a bunch of long-range tests. And so we have some news on there. But then we also have the biggest elephant in the room, I'll say, for the WC in Le Mans ACO is the Ferrari 2023 announcement for Le Mans Hypercar. Ali, did you honestly expect this to happen?
Based on certain tweets from certain people in the paddock, not recently in the paddock, but because of the travel bans. But Marshall Pruitt kind of teased this quite a while ago. It's kind of been maybe a bit of a worst kept secret that something like this was going to happen, because of this thing doesn't happen overnight. This is a long-term plan that a lot of people have to agree with, boards, that sort of thing. But it was certainly exciting when it happened.
Yeah, and there was, we had heard in previous weeks that IndyCar was kind of trying to swoon a bit of Ferrari and that they were interested as well, and that talks had ceased or that had kind of broken down, and Ferrari had essentially said, no, we're not going to go IndyCar. So that kind of left that gap, and we all knew that the budget cap for Formula One was going to start being enacted where they were going to need to reduce or at least to shift some of that financial and even administrative focus from Formula One to something else. And just obviously with how COVID is and, with the pandemic, would be pretty of a negative connotation to see a lot of those, admins or even jobs go away because of that potential F1 cap move or change adjustment. So you kind of thought the pieces were there and set together to really be this kind of announcement, but just speaking as an endurance fan forever and wanting to see Ferrari back, and I grew up looking at the 512 and the 312, even the P4s and, the 250s. So I knew the Ferrari legacy at Le Mans and obviously the Ford versus Ferrari movie that came out recently. So Ferrari's just been in endurance chats, mentions and all that for the last couple of years. It's just, you don't want to get your hopes too high. And, man, boy, did they kind of deliver with that. And enough said, as they said on their tweets. So just a lot of almost, not necessarily repercussions, but discussions that can come from that. And really, the main deal is obviously 2023, so we'll see them then. So that's still a couple of years away. I personally like that just because of how these factory prototype programs usually pan out for success. You know, you want to do as much where you're building momentum into this program as possible. You have the right design, you have the right personnel, you have the right drivers, and the car too tested. So this seems like a pretty sensible timeline to get them into machinery, to get that tested and get that ready for Toyota and Peugeot and Glickenhaus, really for LMH and WEC, not to mention potentially other LMDH entries that could be in the WEC championship then as well. But really, this is the first prototype that Ferrari is going to be making since the 333 SP back in the late 90s. And like I said, it's going to be 50 years essentially since their last major competitive bout at Le Mans. They're going to be coming right back to it. So, I mean, it's all kind of tied neatly into a bow here. And really, the thing that we get to do now is just to speculate how this team gets formed. And they do have some kind of higher up officials, John Elkin, basically making comments about that. But I don't know if we really know anybody technically that's going to be involved in this yet, obviously for drivers as well. I mean, we just had Charles Leclerc say that at the moment his main focus is Formula One, but if a chance comes, why not? And he loves Le Mans. So it's going to be very interesting to see who is all involved with this Ferrari program, because really this feels like uncharted territory from like just almost like a Ferrari endurance standpoint. Do they go AF Corsa and that kind of thing? Ollie, what are your thoughts kind of on where their trajectory would be, and what would this mean for kind of the driver breeding program, let's say in Formula One, like Red Bulls, and how does this maybe change that a little bit?
So, as we're moving to a balance of performance formula, yes, sure, you want to show off that your cars are still the pinnacle of technology of what's allowed, because there's kind of a bit of a downgrade. But I digress. And yeah, so if you want to show off the different angles of your brand or your company, you want to show off that your car is the pinnacle, and they believe Le Mans Hypercar is that, based on the bigger freedoms that it allows. But also you want to show off your brand in terms of the driving talent, and whether that be the young driver programs coming through and showing that Ferrari is the best place to be. This is quite a valuable asset to have, and an outlet to have if you have a large driver program. Mm-hmm. Also, a prime example for this is Callum Eilot, who was kind of potentially snubbed a little bit based on his pretty good performances in F2, to say the least. Mm-hmm. And
very, very talented.
For him to not move up into F1 is kind of like, well, what's he going to do then? At the moment, to stay within Ferrari, he can do some GT things, which would be good for sports cars, crash course, as it were. Well, hopefully with no crashing. But
it's Ferraris.
And exactly. They're going to get crashed into. So, there is a broad base for Ferrari to apply their driver program. It may be the case that, like we see in Factory GT with Factory GT programs, you have brilliant GT drivers going out to GT-Am, Pro-Am formats, where you have an affiliated pro driver. The same could happen if there's a privateer buying a Ferrari chassis, let's say. That hasn't been ruled out. Mm-hmm. If, for example, GT gets smaller and smaller from 2023 onwards, and the Ferrari package can be made available to customers to buy, if you want something that will hold its value, potentially go up in value, be a potential, investor piece, buying a chassis, racing it, and then owning it in a museum, put it like Ben Keating, put it in your front room. You know, that's something that could be viable, and then you show off your driver program, putting these drivers in these satellite programs. You know, wouldn't it be wicked to have like a fluorescent car guy Ferrari Le Mans hypercar? Now, yeah, it might be a bit shit if they've got a pro-am driver lineup, but it's still pretty cool, and it's kind of going into the old days of some of these gentleman drivers that will take it up in the top class. And this kind of broadening of the top class means it doesn't matter so much, because there's going to be so many OEMs with their full factory that are going to be right at the bleeding edge, the knife edge of the race. So yeah, I think it's really exciting.
And I think too, like what you touched on there too a little bit in terms of just, that would be great. I mean, yeah, a car guy Ferrari Le Mans hypercar would be nuts, but I think that also shows that there's more, I guess how you say, for Ferrari showing more commitment a little bit to GT, or at least endurance racing. And so I think if you see more of that actual investment in this category of racing, and this, hey, that we believe that this series, that this form of racing is viable and successful, and that's why we are committed into this, I think that you can also then attract more people into the brand, just that by just their level of commitments. I mean, how much did the LMP1H program for Porsche, you know, I'd cultivate maybe more Porsche drivers, or get more people into driving Porsche GTs that were more available to those kind of drivers than maybe an LMP1 ride. So, you know, that could be a ripple effect that comes from this entry as well. I touched on it slightly with AF Corsa maybe running this, and I know in a lot of the comments we've been seeing on RWC and whatnot, there's been a lot of talk about just assumption that AF Corsa takes over maybe the factory role of this. Do you see that happening, or do you see this more staying in like a factory OEM effort, and maybe AF Corsa does a privateer LMH, or they stay in GTE, or do you think that they do take on the responsibility and role of being that de facto factory OEM program for Ferrari?
I think it's a really good point. So for the people who might not know, Ferrari don't want to do like a fully factory in-house GTE program, just like Porsche or kind of Aston Martin, but mainly Porsche are doing or have done, because they aren't fighting for outright wins. So they're kind of doing it, outsourcing it to a satellite company, AF Corsa. They happen to be called also Ferrari, but completely unrelated, so they say. Yeah, I think they're a prime candidate, because they have that broad base of being in the paddock, and they have, you know, so much business in the GT world. But on the other hand, you know, there are so many people within Ferrari that need to be given work. I think it's a quirk in the Italian employment law, which says that they can't be gotten rid of for like no good reason, as it were, kind of thing. So they have to be kept to do something from the Formula One team somewhere else. And it kind of aligns more and more that this is a fully factory program. But also, if you want to really do it properly and not half-arse it, then you're probably going to do a in-house factory program. You know, a team like Ferrari, they're going to be up themselves so much that they're going to believe that they're the best at doing it. You know?
Yep.
Why would they outsource it to someone else if they think they can do a better job, because, you know, they're Ferrari, they're ego kind of thing. Exactly. You know, that clip from, was it Rush, where Lauda says it's a shitbox, and then the mechanic goes, no, it's a Ferrari.
Can't say that's a Ferrari. Well, hey, and that's honestly, I will love the Italian attitude of that, and to see them, if they do succeed or fail. I mean, hey, it's going to be entertaining for the fans through and through, and again, that's a wrinkle that I'm extremely excited about. And I would hope that it stays factory and that they don't try to like, not necessarily ran by, of course, like everything is there, but then they have a label on it. I would just rather it be from Ferrari themselves. And I think you're right. I think that's how they're going to probably end up doing this. Why do you think that?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Interrupt. But the way I think about this is, as well, or the way I look at their announcement is the timing of it kind of feels a bit significant as well. This kind of comes into Glickenhaus, and we'll talk about them a bit later as well.
Yep.
Potentially, is the 2023. Now, the 2023 aspect is that's going to be the Centenary Race, so everyone really wants to win that one.
Yep.
If they want to turn up at 2023 and win it first time, everything has to be right, and they're going to take their time and do it right first time. Now, that's difficult, but if they join in it too early and they rush it, then because the homologation is locked in, then they're going to be stuck, basically.
Yes. Yep.
So by it being 2023, they're going to have all of their ducks in a row. Everything is going to be perfect with a bow on it, and then they're going to go out and they think they're going to win.
So do you think a rolling chassis by this time next year, or do you think it'll probably be a little bit later? Because I mean, they've got 2 years to do this, and I feel like how that, and I feel like you're absolutely right, and that's a really great point in terms of the significance of their first outing at Le Mans. They're going to need to want to nail everything right, and obviously with Glickenhaus's very open and vocal kind of update progress of how they're essentially building their car and starting to get it ready for homologation, literally, now months away from potentially where they race at Le Mans. It's a stark difference between, what we've just said and kind of how Glickenhaus are doing it. And I wonder, it's so hard to project right now, but I would feel like almost you would want to have by spring next year that they have some form of rolling chassis already ready to go. But how would you see, I guess, since they are projecting in 2 years to go, would that make sense, or what will be a feasible timeline for us to expect maybe them to have a physical product rolling?
So if you kind of look at the way Toyota have been talking about their development program and progress and timing, they are basically behind schedule. And so you can kind of use Toyota's timings and kind of expand them slightly, put a bit of a fudge factor on it, and then you can then say, like, okay, they should be testing around this time, as it were. So obviously everyone does it different. People design cars different ways. They might have testing mules on their own in-house track earlier than Toyota because they've got more of a time window to play around with test mules, whereas Toyota had maybe more of a requirement to get it right quickly and rush it, or not necessarily rush it, but you know what I mean. So they do have time to play with, and they want to make sure that they get it right, and that incorporates a lot of testing of everything, whether that be engines on test rigs and doing endurance simulations by just driving the engine for 36 hours non-stop on a bench, or whether that be in a car doing an endurance session again and again and again, lapping around a test track. That'll be yet to see. The same thing can be said for Peugeot with their timing going into 2023, or potentially joining some races early if the opportunity arises. I think the WEC would be, having open arms to these Le Mans hypercars to be as early as possible, even if they're like a one-off, like Toyota came early in 2012 when Peugeot pulled out. But the main thing proper attempt for the championship for Le Mans is 2023.
Yeah, man, and I just even saying even with the Peugeot thing, it's just Peugeot's here. It's still almost like this is such huge news that not that it doesn't trounce or anything Peugeot, but there's that still element that there's another major factory program that has played such a huge part in the last 20 years of Le Mans, and given us just some of the best Le Mans that I've seen in a long time. They're coming as well with their own timeline and strategy and how they're going to perform. I mean, this is a vindication, I think, for the hypercar class as a whole. And when we were definitely thinking it was on the ropes, or at least that it didn't have a whole leg to stand on, this is very, very a pleasant news, I will say, just from somebody who definitely thought that category had a good reason to be here. So, I mean, and speaking of that, so we can kind of a little bit maybe segue to the LMH category as a whole. Does this kind of vindicate the class? Does this now go, yes, this is something viable? And is there even something where we should maybe expect any more announcements in the future for potential LMH programs?
So I think it's a really good question, and we'll have to wait until Ferrari come out and say it, but it's kind of out in the open that Ferrari were willing to do Le Mans Hypercar because they think there's a potential of maybe perfecting performance better than an LMDH, but also they want to show off their technology, they want to show off their design, and them being the best. And the only way they can do that properly is with a full-on hypercar program. You look at, like we mentioned, the build process of the Glickenhaus. Yes, their budget is smaller, but going into every nut and bolt, the detail that goes into it, compared to just taking a spec items off the shelf. It's exciting. It kind of puts more weight behind Le Mans Hypercar. Yes, sure, it's pretty late, as it were, in the argument, because of what we've gone through in the history of convergence and that complications. There are companies that like to showcase their technology, whether that be McLaren with their chassis, potentially wanting to do a Le Mans Hypercar. That's the sort of feeling where you want to showcase your brand as being a technical powerhouse. You want to do that with Le Mans Hypercar. If you want to showcase your brand as a badge, then you go and do LMDH.
That's honestly about the best description that I've heard, just in terms of a shorthand version of the difference between the two. And I think both of them, and not even from a derogatory standpoint, that's just the nuts and bolts. That's how a lot of these announcements have been decided upon, is because of that. And I think both of them have their own merit. And obviously LMH comes with its own risks in terms of putting yourself out there, being able to showcase your own prowess, might, technology, can come at the cost of doing it wrong and getting it wrong. So, you have that risk. And I think that's too why I like the Le Mans Hypercar category in general, is just because that you have that ability to showcase your own creativity. And you're right, you're not, and while spec parts are there for a very, very good reason, especially in, the 21st century where money is everything, it's awesome to see that there is still the opportunity for people to not necessarily ignore that financial part of it, but push through regardless of it, and to design and create their own thing that we've seen, for the last 70 years racing at Le Mans. So again, that's where I definitely think that this couldn't have come, I would say, at a better time, because I think LMDH is going to absolutely prove itself to be very useful, and very rewarding from that standpoint. And even with the Peugeot announcement, I still feel like you have the potential for Toyota, Peugeot, Glickenhaus, and maybe Alpine if they decided to continue their program into Le Mans Hypercar to showcase their own effort. But with Ferrari, it kind of goes, you have a lot of giants on one side of the court saying that this is the strategy they want to use, and then you have a lot of giants in the other category saying this is the strategy they want to use. And they all seem to be in the same area almost at the same time, and we're just kind of almost waiting for potentially IMSA to get one season of LMDH out of the way before they go, okay, boys, come on over, have some fun at Daytona and Sebring with us. And I feel like that potential almost looming horizon for some of those marks as well can be a huge boon for both IMSA and WEC. And so I feel like, again, it's weird when I think we started talking about this where IMSA was like, nope, we're still going to do our own thing. And it was just kind of like, well, why can't we ever, all work together? And I just, even with this, those two announcements, I just didn't think that we were going to get the levels of commitment on both sides that we kind of almost have right now. And I mean, I'm just so pleasantly chuffed, I guess, just to even be having this discussion, for LMH versus LMDH, and you could almost say both of them are successes already. Granted, we still don't have a ton of cars on track, and we don't even know what the LMP2 cars mother chassis look like for 2.0. But it's just nothing but exciting, and I mean, I would rather be talking about this stuff than talking about program closures or, tightening belts and not seeing cars on track. So I just think the future is really, really bright right now for endurance racing, despite the fact that we don't technically have full convergence set with IMSA. And then to update with that, speaking of, John Doonan was quoted as saying just no update at this time for IMSA with LMH inclusion in their championship. So I thought that kind of, and I think in some of the chats too in Discord and on RWC's Discord and comment sections on the sub, I think some people were kind of pointing at that being where that LMDH wanted to get maybe a full season of their category and maybe BOP and just see where the chips lie on their side first before letting LMH in. And I kind of agree with that. Do you agree too, or do you think we might see a IMSA allowing LMH announcement before 2023?
I think there would be an announcement, but I don't think that there would be inclusion just yet. Mm-hmm. I think they want to not only get their house in order with the LMDHs and get that up to speed. I think they also are a bit maybe worried about the probable potential of a Le Mans Hypercar being the better option in a balance of performance formula, because you get those freedoms to perfect things that you might not be able to by taking spec components from LMP2. And on the other hand, if you look at WEC, if they accidentally let Le Mans Hypercars happen to be just a little bit faster, and they're still trying their best to BOP and get it all dialed in, if an LMH happens to win, that doesn't matter so much. But with IMSA, if they try and get so close to a perfect BOP, but is still a Le Mans Hypercar winning, that's going to be more of an embarrassment. So they're going to probably, because of this data sharing, probably within the arrangements, is take the Hypercar after a few years and after some time sharing the racetrack in WEC between an LMDH and LMH chassis. Then using this data, then they can set up their balance of performance algorithms to maybe give LMDH a fighting chance. Now, that's me speaking with my biases on which chassis I prefer, but it shows that there is a potential, bit of difficulty that they've got. I'm not a fan of the IMSA balance of performance since I've started watching them. I have a lot more faith in the WEC Auto BOP system that's currently used in GT Pro. Whether they let the politics take over because it's for overall wins with a lot of money on the line, maybe. But at the moment going into it, I think I've got a lot more faith in the auto BOP process. Hopefully that's taken across the Atlantic and used as well. I think that would help so much in the quality of racing. Mm-hmm. But yes, that is still a glaringly absent from ever since Convergence. That Hypercar were getting a rough side of the deal, not being able to race in America. And if it comes out that the LMH can't race in America, then that's quite a big sacrifice for Ferrari, because they have a lot of brand value in the US. Their brand equity is huge. Everyone knows Ferrari, especially
it's the largest automotive market, I think, for sales, I believe, still. I mean, it was for like the last decade. It might have changed, but the North American market has been some of the most successful for Ferrari's brand. I mean, I would even say the last 20 years too. It's an extremely well-known and popular brand in the U.S. and only for the aspect that it's not a muscle car and it's the most widely European-known sports car. You think of sports car, Porsche, Ferrari, it's that kind of deal. But Ferrari's just has that opulence. It has that name. It has that name recognition too. So, and again, to your point, I think IMSA has a little bit more that they have to lay these chips on the table for their own teams and for their own factory efforts, and then also for WEC, because we've looked at the Daytona 24 even, and this past year we've had a different chassis winner finally, and it's been Cadillac that's been dominating, and we've said almost for like the last 2-3 years it's because that Dallara chassis is good. It has a good straight line speed, it's got good stability there. The Cadillac's torque, low end torque with their V8 is extremely good with the GM factory powerhouse behind it. So there's strengths for that seemingly specific track, whereas you'll see maybe the Cadillacs not perform as well at Mid-Ohio or, even Road America, something like that, where, there maybe the strengths don't lie as much there. But where we see the ACO and WC kind of have to put in a little bit more of this is how we're doing this BOP for Le Mans specifically with their Le Mans test day. And yes, they've even had their own controversy with that. I feel like there is a part of it where they are acknowledging that it is such a unique and different race and that they do have to establish, a very valid and honest BOP process with this, that it does ease and calm a bit of fears from all parties that are being involved. And I do feel like you're right. If we do get to a point where IMSA wants to potentially include LMH, they've got to put in there either so that when, these teams show up, that they're not going, okay, well, what do we have? Or what are we working with? What hill do we have to climb? And I feel like IMSA would do a whole lot of good to establish which hills WC teams have to climb over in order to win, and obviously not be too crazy. But I do still, I do feel that would be an honest, or at least a more approachable way for IMSA to include LMH, is that they are, even almost more upfront with how their process works than the ACO is with theirs. Again, because the ACO doesn't, for all of what we've known over the last, 10, 20, the entirety of ACO, is that they believe in Le Mans and they believe in their brand and product, and that they know that is going to just exist, until we, I guess, stop using automobiles as a decent form of transportation. So, there is definitely a onus, I think, that IMSA will have to even prove not only to LMH teams, but LMDH teams, that they have a very solidified plan in place for how they want to categorize performance between the two categories. So, yeah, I mean, that's going to be something to look at too. And again, yeah, you said it is a glaring hole, we'll say, in the LMH, LMDH kind of convergence discussion. And for all the LMDH to Le Mans, there is that gap where you don't really see, or this discussion of LMH to Daytona yet, which I think both of them should be there, and Sebring. I mean, just from the endurance standpoint and Ferrari's own commitment and their own history at Sebring too. I feel like there is that gap that in that calendar year for endurance racing that would be difficult to see if LMH isn't included in those months. So I
can see them doing full season.
Yeah.
You know, if you think of, yeah, sure, they might be in a bit of a low period right now, but you've got the history of a team like Risi and the history of Ferrari in North American motorsport. You know, there is history there to build on. And like I mentioned before, yeah, maybe it might be not a fully factory effort, but the value of these Ferrari hypercars for an investment, but also, you know, to go racing with Ferrari is pretty cool. There is, you know, enough behind that to have a full season Ferrari racing in the top class of IMSA.
And two, you know, and again, expounding with the Sebring stuff, I mean, there's so much history that I feel like a lot of sports car and American sports car fans, you know, their progression of understanding and learning endurance racing, if they go back a few years, you know, there's so many instances where it's, you know, Ferrari is involved in, you know, in some of these notable races or notable finishes. I mean, we'll talk about 2007's 12 Hours of Sebring, where it was Porsche and Ferrari banging doors to the line to win the GT class. And then the whole Steve McQueen saga in 1970 with the 908, and, you know, basically whether or not they actually did win, or Mario Andretti's Ferrari, you know, 512 that he ended up jumping into after his broke down and ended up passing with a couple, you know, with minutes to go with the race, won the race. And it's those kind of races that a lot of people have images of, we'll read articles about, and it's, I think, that the history that you can absolutely mate with the current modern edition of that. And again, where the unseen levels of commitment for 50 years with Ferrari, I think, is nothing to shake, to ignore or shake away. And that would be, again, that's something too that I wasn't really thinking about. If they wanted to try to make a Risi, or at least make something esque of that, and of course a privateer team to try to run in the U.S., or somebody that's committed, you know, in the U.S. right now that is, hey, Ferrari's available, I'm grabbing one of them if I can, I'm racing it. So I would be beyond excited to see something like that, and even if it's not the factory team, just to have a Le Mans hypercar that's a Ferrari racing at Daytona or Sebring would just, I think, would do so much for you know, sports car racing in the U.S. Just from even an advertisement standpoint. I mean, that's just, I mean, you're striking gold right off the gate there, I think. So, man, I can't wait to talk more about this with you later on, and I feel like we'll have another 1 or 2 episodes with more information coming from Ferrari and from the LMH category, potential, you know, more words from John
more
Doonan.
OEM.
Yep,
more
maybe.
OEM.
Fingers crossed on that. Man, we've been talking a lot about that, but I want to kind of shift gears slightly, if you will, Ollie, and let's talk a little bit of the ACO territory. Maybe something slightly a bit controversial, and definitely got a lot of comments talking on the sub. The Michelin Le Mans Cup for 2021 has a new regulation out, and it's called the Bronze Plus, well, I'll say penalty. And essentially what it is there's a 20-second penalty or a 50-second penalty if you are like a half or 3/4 of the speed, or something into a silver driver's rated time established. So essentially it would be a bronze rated driver that comes into a race and starts lapping in the almost silver ranked times, and depending on how fast that is, he would be then doled a 20-second stop and hold penalty during his next pit stop to essentially penalize the overspeed based on his driver rating. And this got a lot of criticism from some of the comments, and I'm curious, Ollie, your opinion on this new regulation for Michelin Le Mans Cup.
I am probably in the minority, but I'm kind of okay with it, to be honest. You know, yeah, sure, it sucks if you're a driver that's been given this penalty. But what are you going to do? You're going to constantly beat your opponents. Maybe they will relish the extra challenge before being upgraded to a better driver rating. in this case up to silver. Just looking at it in a purely robotic, analytical view, when you would think about driver ratings, which are kind of like a lesser of two evils, as it were, you have different zones or bands that you put drivers in to make the racing fairer and more equal across the board. If you have those bands quite wide, you have a lot of range for the different drivers' talents to fit within. And the broader you make that range and the band, and the more drivers you fit in there, the less equal it's going to be, because you're going to have one person who's at the top end of that band of driver rating going up against someone at the bottom of that band, and they're going to be wildly different. But on paper, racing isn't raced on paper, but they're supposed to be the same. So if you increase the number of bands, then you should increase the equality, because you're having a more representative band for that driver in the most part. Now, obviously, it's never perfect, and you can overcomplicate things. You know, if you have 10 bands of driver rating, then it gets really complicated. But it's a tough job. I don't envy them, but this is the way that they're going about it, and they're making, in my opinion, they're trying to make an improvement in the fairness of the sport. And yeah, sure, it might not be everyone's favourite, but the motive behind that is good. It sucks if you are given a penalty for being a legitimate amateur driver that is doing their bit to get faster, to hopefully get maybe to become professional, only to be held back. But on the other hand, you know, you've got other people who are spending a lot of money who want to be able to compete. And if you are at the lower end of a driver ranking band, you're not going to be performing that well on average. You know, you look at David Heinemeier Hansen is a great example.
Yes, yep.
He, in a prototype, was great. You know, he, as a silver, as the amateur driver in an LMP2 format, brilliant. And then for some reason, in the GTE, when he moved to Project One with the Porsche, he was kind of in the middle or at the bottom of the silver band. And especially when he's going up against kind of factory-backed young drivers that are going to be soon pros, they're going to be at the top of the band. Now, if you take away the argument that those young drivers shouldn't be silvers, which, you know, fair play, he would, if there was some measure, then he would be more competitive in the race. So, you know, if you think about certain drivers that may be at the lower band that still want to get better, this is helping them to not be discouraged by racing in these Pro-Am formats. It's clunky, it's awkward, they're going all in on their way of doing things, which some people aren't happy about, but it's their house, it's their rules.
Ollie, you made almost every single point that I wanted to make. So, so it's unfortunately no controversial opinions here from both of us. I think I'm very much in agreement with you. And to clarify, I just actually did look at this. So it's lapping in the third and fourth quarters of the silver spread. So kind of like your bands, essentially when they hit in that silver driver, they have a scale spread. If they hit in the top third category, they'll get 50-second penalty. In the fourth quarter, they'll get a 20-second penalty of that spread. So that's where their logic comes from, and I totally agree. And my angle really from this is that if you take a look at what sports car racing is doing, unlike almost any other sport that you'll see out there, is that there's an inclusion of amateur competition with professional competition. And the way that they're trying to include the amateur, I'll just say from a sports car standpoint too, is that a lot of the amateur drivers are supplying a lot of the funds for some of the even professional efforts that we see and enjoy. So there is a part of this where you cannot ignore the AM side of it from even a monetary standpoint, and nevertheless from just hey, we're enjoying the series, we're enjoying the atmosphere, we're enjoying the company. So there is a part of this where you need to listen to both of those sides, but you also kind of need to try to make an even playing field and to bring all of those people in to say, hey, I have a shot at winning this. And I think that is such a powerful tool to keep a lot of these teams and drivers going when you don't have those traditional mechanisms like a Formula One, a NASCAR, WRC, a lot of these other ones where there is a very strict, it's at the top, it's pro, and then as you work your way down, there's less pro, and then you start to get into AM somewhere, but it's all a top-down financial ladder too, where it is the top ones are spending, but it's all assumed that people are going to be spending around the same, and you'll have that interest all the time. I think what the ACO have shown, especially with the lean years that we've had over the last 30 years in international endurance racing, and even with the SRO series, is that if you can create a competitive championship in which you have competitors from all aspects of racing and driving and backgrounds to go, hey, I have a shot at competing with this, or I have a shot at being very entertained by participating in this event. That is extremely powerful from just a staying power for that series. And I mean, we've seen the growth of ELMS, Asian Le Mans Series, and even the Le Mans Cup, where like these grid counts, I don't know if we would have been saying 5-6 years ago that we would have seen that, especially with the Asian Law Series. And I feel like there is a lot of that is based on these driver ratings and based on the ability for you to say, hey, look, I'm not that good of a driver compared to Sean Gulail or a Bloomquist or somebody like that. But the way that the series lays out those skill levels is that I can pair up with a couple other people like that, and to bring and for me to be my own X factor. And so I feel like with this bronze and silver issue that people are saying, okay, well they can't hit to silver length. Well, it's not about necessarily those pro drivers or those guys that are really, really trying to step up their game and whatnot. And also to that end, I mean, if we do hit that, where we have 3 or 4 guys this year that are constantly hitting that, then yeah, I think the ACO needs to look at, okay, maybe halfway through, let's reassess driver ratings, or we can do another bronze test. We'll have 2 bronze or silver tests a year, one after Le Mans, one preseason, prologue or something like that, where you have the ability to essentially move up a rank if you need to, if you're hitting this issue. And I think that it's a complicated way to try to resolve a complicated problem, in which you do have amateur drivers with tons of money that can get shut out by the understandably up-and-coming silver-rated 17-year-old who's coming from open wheel that wants to now switch to endurance racing. And I think both of them have an absolute right to be on that track. It's just, I think, giving it the right, savory notes for both of them to find a reason to race there year after year. And I think that as much as we want to complain about the driver ratings, I think that has honestly helped to keep a lot of AM drivers and a lot of AM teams still competing and still wanting to show up and still wanting to find sponsors and to find funding for these programs year after year. I genuinely think that. And so, fine, this might be a little bit teething. It might not look great to begin with, but I think that it's a good idea. And I don't think it'll go beyond maybe the bronze and silver areas where we're seeing penalties like that. But I think for how much we need the amateurs in this sport, this is absolutely will ease a little bit of fears, I think, for some of them who can genuinely have a gripe with some of the discrepancies in lap times between some bronze and some silver drivers that we would consider AM. And
the ACO, they need to show that they're trying, they're doing something.
Mm-hmm.
They need to give confidence in those amateurs that feel aggrieved by, some drivers that pretty much break the system. You mentioned these super silvers. It's kind of part of the game now, is to find a driver that breaks the driver rankings system.
Yep.
So this is the kind of reply to that. And this then comes a question to you then. Is this just in the more amateur focused at the bottom rung of the ACO ladder, as it were? Or do you think this is like a soft launch to gauge opinion, to see if it works, to then move up to potentially ELMS, where we've historically seen some ridiculous super silvers that then go on to perform really well at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, or maybe even go up to the WEC or Asian Le Mans series, where we saw some ridiculous super silvers.
Yes. So that's where I think that's where the trajectory is going. And I mean, slippery slope, you could say, from there, because, again, I think it'll depend on how successful or unsuccessful, I guess, that this is, in terms of, maybe trying to realign or just, correctly align some of these driver ratings. Because again, I mean, now you have teams and drivers that are going to be not necessarily second guessing, but they're going to be having a focus more on what is your pace, what is your potential, output here, how much of an advantage can we really take from you if we potentially can get penalized from you. And I think that, there is a wrinkle there that can deter potential drivers from going here or there. But then again, it puts the onus more on some of these drivers and teams to have to pick out the right drivers, and where they're not trying to find that X factor super silver all the time to really, benefit from a flawed driver rating, we'll say. So I honestly do see this potentially going to ELMS, Asian Le Mans Series, and WC. And I was thinking maybe because we're doing LMP3 and GTD, I think this both counts for the both categories, that, will this expand to LMP2, and could you go that way? I do think so, especially when you are, especially with the Asian Le Mans Series, where you do have that bronze factor in almost every category. I think this will be something that the ACO tests here, and then will look to probably push to their other series, regional or international series potentially there too. And again, until I start seeing true negatives from this, where you have teams and drivers actually have a genuine complaint from just maybe how this is implemented, I just think that this is a good thing, and this keeps and forces these drivers and teams to be honest with their driver lineups and what their expectations are, and who they're looking at potentially bringing on to their team based on their actual, ranking. We'll say amateur professional ranking based on these driver ratings. I think that this just gives a more clear opportunity for these teams to do that. So yeah, I do see this potentially expanding to other ACO products. And again, until otherwise seen, I think that is a good thing too. I think that just gives more confidence in the competitors that compete in those respective championships.
For some that are then the counterpoint to that is for those drivers that might feel aggrieved, or teams that might feel aggrieved, that if, for example, G Drive, if they felt that they're aggrieved for following the rules at the time and getting a super silver, and then suddenly being penalised for it, what's to say they won't then go to IMSA and just say, screw it, we'll go to your competitor, So there's a fine line that has to be tread by the ACO to get it right, or as close to right as possible. Because on the one hand, you've got amateurs who are going to pull their money, and teams are going to not have work, and people are going to lose their jobs because some amateurs feel aggrieved. But on the other hand, you might go too far and piss off some of your top competitors, and they'll pull out and go somewhere else. It's a fine line.
And to your saying too, so I'm thinking about this as well. So, we could have where there are still team strategies that come into play. You have the more pro drivers or silver gold drivers that are on a team that are maybe going from they start the race and they're on fresh rubber, that kind of thing, and then when they box and put in the AM driver, sure, it might be much more tricky for that AM driver, but if they're on worn tires with maybe a full fuel load, that's going to cause a play for their speed to be lower. You'll also see maybe where traffic or even weather, where these teams are going to maybe potentially just try to massage some of these maybe bronze plus drivers that would be penalized in a normal scenario, to put them in a disadvantage where there's no way for them really to show their full or raw pace to hit that silver rating as well. So you could just still see teams where they're trying to work around this issue while still having the problem, that this is supposed to fix, which is to try to remove that disparity of performance or pace from these drivers. So, that's a great point. And I think too, with the G drive, they would probably be the thing the team that I would think first off, because that's really the team that a lot of people just know from the get-go when you say Super Silvers or, trying LMP2, trying to win everything in any way possible. That's the team that I would think the most of. And I think that they would be affected the most by this kind of thing, especially with how Rusinov seems to be in terms of his driving pace. So great point. And I think I don't think it's all sunny in terms of this decision to be made, but I think that there should be a curiosity to whether or not that this is in the right direction, or if this does address some of the concerns that some of these AM drivers were having over the last few years, which it's definitely starting to get a little bit more vocal with that. So, great points. And we'll see, I guess, how this works out and plays out, and we'll see how many of these penalties get issued this year. I do have a feeling we should see them. It'll be interesting to see what teams are affected or what running order kind of shifts because of this. But yeah. Great topics. The last thing I think that we'll cover today, and I don't know if we'll actually get to any recaps, which is kind of a good, because we're almost doing a state of endurance, like I said earlier. We're going to talk a little bit IMSA, and I wanted to get your thoughts on the GTE experiment that is coming to a close over in the North American market. IMSA announced during the Daytona 2024 weekend that they're shifting from GTLM, which is the GTE equivalent from the ACO that they were running, which Corvette is famously running in currently. They're going to shift to a GT3 format, GT3 Pro. So a little bit like the SRO categories for Spa 24, Nürburgring 24, where you have GT3, well, let's say AMs, and the GT3 Pro category, where you have more professional drivers racing GT3 homologated or configuration equipment. What are your thoughts on this, Ollie? And I guess where do we go here for GTE?
It's a shame because it's a downgrade in terms of going from the pinnacle of GT racing, which the North American scene has had quite a lot of in history with the GT2 and things like that. Yeah, it's a shame. There's less variety on the grid as well, because you're just taking the cars from GTD and putting pro drivers in them. But there may be more, excitement. There's more buzz in having pro teams. But another thing, on the other hand, is it's kind of shooting themselves in the foot a bit, because you're giving an OEM an easy way out for spending less compared to going into LMDH. This is why the ACO's been holding off so long in terms of their GT changes that may or may not be happening on the horizon. If you give an easy way out for an OEM to spend less to do a branding exercise, well, they're just going to, do the cheaper option, because we're in a pretty tough time at the moment financially.
Mhm.
Just do a GT3 program, easy. Yeah, I think there would be good opportunities in America for certain brands. You think Porsche, Acura, Ferrari, we mentioned them before. Then there's the chance of Mercedes doing a pro outfit, for example. There will be growth, but on the other hand, it's also a step down in terms of variety of car, and having the pinnacle of GT racing in IMSA.
Great, and yeah, very great points. I mean, and a couple of things I wasn't even thinking about too, just from a participation and just and not needing to take the spending more and taking that a little bit easier route. I know IMSA's, I think their angle too with this is the participation fee to race in IMSA. So once that's already fulfilled, and that if you have enough interest, basically if you make something exciting enough for OEMs to go, yep, I'm going to spend $1 million so that I have the opportunity to race in here, then that obviously opens up opportunities for teams to go, okay, I can now race in here. And because you have a category that is so widely known throughout international endurance racing with the SRO GT3 platform, you do have the ability to include a lot of different interest and talk and people that would be willing to maybe spend more money here. Again, my fears are the same with you, is that while we do see this kind of quote unquote fix the GTLM, the professional GT problem that we seem to be having in IMSA these days, I think it opens the door for less I want to say less factory involvement in terms of commitment to trying to really push their own brand image or technology, that kind of thing, in GT racing as a whole. I think that GTE was a bit of more like the prototype GTs that I kind of grew up watching, and and I think that you do lose a factor in a part of that. The thing is that I don't know if that will really matter too much to fans, because they will just see a lot of close racing. And I think if they do nail the BOP, or at least that the how the GTD category has been pretty somewhat successful, I'd say. I mean, the Lexus program has done a lot of winning, we'll say, over the course of 2 years, but how much has that elevated them to go step up to do Nürburgring 24, like a equivalent effort there, or Spa 24, or how much people have been wanting them to step up into prototype racing and do LMDH and do DPI, and they have just sat in here and done this and kind of collected their acclaim and their marketing stats from GTD. And so I feel like this also opens the door for people to not want to look to anywhere else, because they can take this very, I won't say cheap, but it's a very understandable, very kind of controlled and tight, or an already established format that they can step into and try to immediately grab acclaim. And so while I see that as being a positive, there is that aspect where you do lose really the ability for teams and or manufacturers to really want to stay in this category to win, other than we just think we have a shot to win these races and to plaster that on a poster. So granted, I mean, that's mostly everybody, but no, I agree. I do think weirdly that this doesn't seem like this seems a weird IMSA move, because of how they've really been DPI and LMDH and all that. They've wanted their own marketing brand and that stuff. And I feel like with GT, this seems more of a quick fix than an actual fix to their problem, which is just GT factory or GT professional involvement in North America, which seems to be lacking for the last 10 years.
Yeah, and I think they can't get away with their BOP system with so few cars in a class.
Mm-hmm.
They can't get away with a race with bad BOP, or like 2 races in a row with bad BOP. because there are so few cars to get close racing with bad BOP. Like, if you have 6 OEMs, each with 2 cars, and half of them have bad BOP, you're still going to have a good race at the front. Whereas if you've got 2 OEMs and half of them have bad BOP, you're just going to have 2 cars, one OEM up the road, and then the other one just doing nothing at the back. So they needed to make a move. I think it's too early, and it also screws over Corvette.
Yeah,
because their shiny new C8 that seem to be doing all right. They don't have a long-term ability to race in America with it in its current form. They need to do a lot to it to make it into a GTD eligible vehicle. But at least we are seeing it still move overseas to do the World Championship in WEC.
Yes. And so speaking of, we'll do a quick little, let's say, state of WC right now. And speaking of Corvette, they are going to be racing at Portimao. And they're set to contest basically the Portimao and Spa before Le Mans. So they should be doing those 3 races this spring in the WC calendar. And they will be joined by 31 other cars with obviously the main contenders for hypercar class for the next foreseeable future. Toyota having their 2 cars going to be on the grid. But we are not going to be seeing the Glickenhaus 007 hypercars. And they just had their, let's say, shakedown in the last week. They're still planning on doing a 30-hour test, which is supposed to happen soon after the Portimao date, which is their reason for not being at that first round for that 8-hour contest. So is there, as a, let's say, a David fan versus Goliath, is there anything to note, to be concerned about? Obviously, because it's David, you got to be concerned about that anyway. But I guess, what are your thoughts on the Glickenhaus effort so far with their shakedown and obviously missing that first round? Where do you see them at the end of this calendar year?
So I wouldn't be too scared about it. If we think about no-shows from LMP1, that's kind of a bringer of doom in terms of those programs, that it shines a light on, financial problems, or the team doesn't want to race, for example, with Team LNT and stuff like that. This isn't a sign that the entry is a vaporware or whatever, or they've run out of money or something like that. This is more to do with the homologation is locked in. They can't make any changes. It's not a pure prototype format anymore where you can make adjustments race to race. They have to make sure it's right and locked in. And to do that, they need to turn up to the homologation with a car that they feel is perfect. Now, that takes a lot of testing, and that needs to correlate all of their design work that they've done on computers and in those clever Italian heads to make sure that that car is right. If they need to make any adjustments or go back to the drawing board, they're going to do it. So long as they turn up to Le Mans with the car, or Spa with a car that they feel is right, they'll do it. So yes, they still have a lot of work to do. They've only, at the moment, as we know, or for all we know, they've built 1 car. They need to test it a lot. They need to take it to a wind tunnel. I believe there will be the Sauber wind tunnel, which is handy because they've already been there with their models in the design process, because they were supported by Sauber. And they then need to tick all the boxes that the car is legal to race and become a proper, fully fledged Le Mans hypercar. I think we need to exercise some patience, because they want to do it right. You know, if they turn up to Portimao and it's a little bit shit, that's locked in for the rest of the year.
Yep.
And there's very limited things that they can do with their, unless it's a chassis setup issue, because then they can adjust that. But if it's something wrong with the fundamental design of the car or the aerodynamics or something like that, there's nothing they can do, and they're stuck.
Yep.
And it's good for the ACO to allow them to do this, because then they'll get a fairer, more broad fight in the top class. So yes, we should also mention that on the entry list for Portimao, the Toyotas haven't been homologated yet. They have an asterisk subject to homologation.
Mm-hmm.
So that still needs to be done, and it kind of gives you an indication of how long it will take to get these cars homologated in time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if you forecast the time taken from Toyota's first tests, which were months ago, and Glickenhaus is only just starting now, you can kind of forecast into the future when we'll see them racing. Hopefully it'll be for Spa, because that's a really good place for them to do high speed prep for the 24 Hours of Le Mans. They really need to do competition before the big 24. So yeah, sure, it sucks that they aren't going to the first round, and the first round is a bit has a bit of a shine taken off it. But on the other hand, I mean, the other classes, especially the Pro-Am classes, they look great. So more camera time on the other classes, that's not a bad thing.
13 GT AMs, man, that's going to be pretty nuts, just for the amount of, 18 total GT cars compared to the 14 LMPs that are going to be competing, or Le Mans hypercar / prototypes that are going to be there too. So it's going to be a great kind of mix of cars. And yeah, you're right, it's going to be a little bit lacking for Portimao and maybe for Spa as well. But for people that are thinking that he might not be at Le Mans, I mean, he's saying that or 2 cars. He's saying that you could bet your kidneys that we'll be there with 2 cars. So Jim's in his bombastic tone as usual. Wants is, I guess, betting kidneys that he's going to have both of his cars at Le Mans. So, and I think too, for they're saying in logistical and travel restrictions with key parts being delayed for the build and all that. And again, with your points from homologation, I think that this isn't great news, but this is better than basically them rushing this and trying to get this into homologation too quickly. And I think that this is nothing but, I would say, a good sign that they're doing things, to my knowledge, to be the right way, and where you're taking the time, and if you hit delays, you hit delays, and you just have to push on with your own pace and your own satisfaction with the program. And I think that this is a sign of that. So I'm it's bummed that I'm not going to see him at Portimao on the TV. And hopefully at Spa, but I'm excited to see what they can do once they start getting onto the public roads in France. So,
serves them right for blocking everyone on Twitter.
See, joke's on him. I don't have a Twitter account, so I just say the public side and read it from there. But yeah, it's it'll be interesting to see, and maybe that's for a good thing too for him. If he was at the prologue, maybe he would be ticking half the paddock off too quickly anyway. If they would be looking at his car, so maybe taking some time to get everything right, and so that he feels comfortable with the car might be better for some of his discussions in the paddock during the race weekend. So. But yeah, and then lastly, just as a FYI, that both Portimao and Spa rounds are going to be held behind closed doors. So due to COVID concerns, both the Portugal round and the Belgium rounds of first 2 rounds of the WC Championship in 2021 are going to be behind closed doors, not allowing fans. As a last bit for this episode, Ollie, what do you think in terms of the projections for this? Do you see any fans, any spectators at a WEC round this year?
I do see yes. It might be more weighted to the back end of the year because there's still time needed to get these vaccines out into the general population, and also get these numbers down for infection rates and things like that. But anything can happen. It's tough to forecast, obviously.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, as well, in terms of a financial reason, the ACO at the moment, they really need that ticket money for the 24 Hours of Le Mans. 200,000 people usually pre-COVID. That's a lot of money that they have been missing out on for a while now, across their series, but also at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. May we see them delay it again to September? I think it's highly possible, to be able to maximize the amount of people that they can get through those gates. I wouldn't buy those plane tickets just yet, Austin, for June. I'd wait out just a little bit longer, because things might still change. I think they might move the calendar around a little bit to make sure that they can get those people in, with those tickets in to see those cars go round and round.
Excellent point with the moving potentially Le Mans. I didn't really think of that. I kind of thought it was, I guess just not thinking that they couldn't move it, but just it was like, well, they already moved it already last year, so I don't think they're going to try to move this year. But I think you're right. I think that is a huge factor for the ACO to want to try to, if there is that inkling that maybe local authorities will allow then instead of June, some fan attendance, maybe not full or whatever. I think that's
to do it that way.
Yes,
because the whole region benefits. People are coming from all over the world, hundreds of thousands of people. It props up the whole region, the economy of the region, and the politicians will need this to happen, not the cars going round and round, but the people turning up, because they bring their money, and the people in that region want that money to be spent in and around that area.
Yeah, they don't just spend it at the track. They do not just spend it at that track.
Sure.
Man. And again, like you said, this is, I will make sure not to be to solidifying too many plans just yet. But I do hope that they can get to a point where that there can be some form of fan attendance, so that you can get some fan interaction with maybe the tail ends of these rounds, especially at Le Mans. I think that is absolutely something that they're going to try, and if they can try to find a way to do it, that they do it. And I mean, with how vaccine rollouts are going in the next 2 months, this could be a lot better of a scenario that could be hitting the ACO to maybe move this back a bit, or it might be to the point where that you do have local authorities that are much more keen to it because they have their own local vaccination rates are higher or whatnot. So you could almost even see something where there could be a vaccine almost requirement for some of this stuff, and see if that works. So there's a lot of wrinkles that could potentially come from this in the future. So we'll just have to keep our eyes and ears open for any updates that come that way. So Ollie, I really appreciate you taking time to hang out with me, get this update for endurance racing kind of squared away. There's been so much stuff going on that I felt like it was necessary to kind of get down to the nuts and bolts with some of this stuff, and not even talk about some of the races and series that have literally started and ended by the time before from this podcast episode from the last one. So we'll save that for Floody Michael and for Kiwi Chris to talk about the Asian Le Mans series, and probably force them to talk about Daytona 24, even though both of those down under people have no idea what happened through that. But I think I'll listen to that just for my entertainment to hear them try to talk about the IMSA race that happened almost 2 months ago. But that'll be for the next podcast episode. But I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And Ollie, I really appreciate you coming out, man. And hopefully we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. This news has been exciting, and hopefully there's more to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, if we get another LMH announcement, we'll be right back here to discuss that. Fingers crossed.
You bet.
All right, everyone, you guys have a great rest of your day and enjoy the weather as it improves. Stay safe out there, and GRO1 Gazoo!